Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the AIM on MS&T podcast. I'm your host, Kate, and I'm so glad you have joined us today. If you are new here, let's catch you up. AIM stands for Academia, Industry, and Military, which are the sectors that form the foundation of the modeling, simulation, and training community right here in Central Florida. Together, they make up what is known as Team Orlando, a collaborative partnership driving innovation and mission readiness through MS&T. Each episode, we sit down with leaders and innovators within the MS&T world to talk about what's new, what's next, and why it matters, especially to our Team Orlando community. Whether you're deep in the field or just curious about one of Orlando's biggest industries, second only to the theme parks and hospitality industry, we're here to keep you informed, inspired, and part of the conversation. This episode is brought to you in part by Capital Communications and Consulting, telling your story across all platforms with a clear focus and innovative impact. Whether you want to elevate your message, grow your presence, or connect with the right audience, the C3 team will help bring your story to life. Learn more at mycapitalcommunications.com. Today, our guest is Liz Bledsoe, Project Manager for Training Devices of Program Executive Office Simulation, Training, and Instrumentation, also known as PEO STRI. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
To begin, can you tell our audience about yourself? Also, please walk us through your journey in the military and what led you to your current role.
Sure. I'm an Army brat, went into the Army, and now I still work for the Army. So my Army career started out with ROTC at Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia.
Okay.
I was commissioned in the Signal Corps, and my first duty station was 11th Signal Brigade at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. So with the 11th Signal Brigade, I deployed twice, once to Somalia and once to Haiti. And then skipping a few, I transferred to the Acquisition Corps, and then I worked in a couple of organizations like the Defense Threat Reduction Agency and Joint Program Executive Office Joint Tactical Radio Systems in California until my retirement in 2012. I spent 2 years in industry after I retired from the military, and then I became a government civilian while working in the Pentagon for ASALT, Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. And that was about 2014. I left the Pentagon because I was essentially recruited to come down here and start the Program Management Office, Cyber Resiliency and Training.
Okay.
And the Persistent Cyber Training Environment specifically at that time. Colonel Tom Monahan came in and was the product manager, and after I'd been here for a while, I decided I wanted to be a product manager also, so I competed and became the product manager for electronic warfare integration under PEO, Intelligence, Electronics, Warfare, and Sensors up in Aberdeen, Maryland, and that was for 3 years. I just basically finished that last year, and then in the last year I've been in senior service college basically preparing for this job as the PM for trade.
Building on that, let's start at the beginning. You've held a number of critical roles throughout your military career. What originally drew you to the Signal Corps, and also, how did that shape your trajectory?
I think the one reason I put Signal Corps as one of my options is the technical side of it. I was always kind of a techie person, and I like the idea of just making things more futuristic on that kind of thing. Ultimately, the Army decided that I was going into the Signal Corps. Unfortunately, it was one of my top choices. The Signal Corps has been a good base for me because a lot of my programs, even in the Army, Joint Tactical Radio Systems is an easy one to correlate to Signal Corps, but I've dealt a lot with software. Since then, PCTE was one program that was software-based, and then Electronic Warfare Integration was an EW planning software application. So I've dealt with a lot of software, and I think that background in the Signal Corps has really helped with those foundational knowledge. The Signal Corps, at least when I was in, because it's changed quite a lot, is basically the means of providing the networking whether it was by telephone, satellite, or radio for the forces so that they were able to communicate, essentially command and control. So the two units I was in the Signal Corps was 11 Signal Brigade and 7 Signal Brigade were at the more strategic level. Mm-hmm. So when we went to the field, we were putting in phone systems. So it was designed more for headquarters and things that didn't move very often.
Yeah.
Whereas in the divisions and things like that, they have signal units, and those guys were putting in more radio type networks at that level. And so I was a tactical satellite platoon leader. And then in Haiti, I actually took the first prototype of it was email. It was like servers and routers that allowed people to email back to CONUS.
Oh, wow.
A very rough looking piece of equipment, but it was brand new.
Yeah.
While I was down there.
Across your service and civilian roles, you've led a diverse, multidisciplinary team. What's your approach to leadership in high-stakes and high-tech environments?
I think it boils down to two things in my mind. The first is willing to assume risk. You can't control everything, and especially when you're dealing with new innovation and things that you haven't done before, that is something you have to just be able to assume risks. You're not going to be able to know everything. And so you have to declare your intentions and the desired end state, and then let the people that work for you kind of run with it. When I started with persistent cyber training environment and building PMCRT, it was my house of cards. And I was very controlling of it because it was very fragile at the time. But when I actually let go and let people like Amit Kapadia and Robbie Parrish do their thing, things worked a lot better. So I assumed the risk. I decentralized a lot of the execution and let them do it. The second thing I would say is focus on the outcome, not the process. And acquisition is a very process-oriented thing. And it's very easy for us to get lost in the process and forget what we're trying to achieve. So the best model of that was my former boss, my good friend, Colonel Tom Monahan, who clearly understood the desired effect that he wanted to achieve, and that was his critical path, and then everything else was noise. I learned a lot from that, and I try to practice in that same way.
Transitioning into another major milestone, you played a major role in laying the foundation for Army cyber acquisition programs. Can you walk us through what that looked like and why it was a pivotal time for the Army?
Sure. Yeah, I was one of a team of people that basically tried to corral cyber programs as they started to get started. There was a number of them in various PEOs that were doing different types of things, and so they started what they called the cyber focal that had visibility over all the cyber programs within the Army, acquisition part of the Army. And so the idea was that we would help push requirements through, help get funding, and provide that overview of what was going on among the cyber programs and tie them together into a holistic story. This was a big culture shift within the Army, and so you had to articulate the intent. And then there was a lot of confusions about that because a lot of people didn't understand the difference between cybersecurity and cyber operations. So initially, there was a lot of people thinking that we were duplicating cybersecurity, which was already being done by the G6 and Netcom and those things like that. No, we weren't duplicating cybersecurity. Cyber operations is a lot more hands-on and a lot less passive.
So, shifting gears just a little, you helped initiate the Persistent Cyber Training Environment, also known as PCTE, at PEO STRI. Can you share how that concept came to be and what problem it was built to solve?
Sure. Yeah, I can start to paint that picture. I mean, cyber operations was, again, not a concept well understood. And the services had cyber operators, and they were starting to build these teams. And they had jobs like defensive, active defense, and offensive cyber operations, which means their maneuver space was in the networks themselves, whether they were ours or somebody else's. The problem was they had nowhere to train. They can't train on live networks because if they did something wrong, they break the network. And so, services were basically out there buying hardware and software and creating these bootleg closet ranges. And there was even one urban myth that the Navy had procured or borrowed or whatever, some equipment, and had it installed in a guy's garage, and that's where they were doing their cyber operations training.
Okay.
Never could confirm or deny that urban myth, but it went around forever. So Congress got tired of the services basically requesting funding for this, And so in a NDAA, they requested that the services get together and pick a cyber operations training system, and that ended up being PCTE. So it was designed to be a joint cyber operations training system, even though it's not a joint program. And from what I heard, it's still the system that Cybercom uses to train their forces today.
Now bringing it to present day, you recently taken on a new role. For our audience who may not be familiar with PM Trade, can you please explain the mission and talk about your specific role within the organization?
Sure. PM Trade is the oldest project management office in PEO STRI. It was the first. So that's really cool in itself, to be able to take it over. Such a historical program, especially after working a program where you just started, and there was really no history. But PM Trade provides training devices to the forces at various levels. So it supports institutional, home station training, and it supports the combat training centers where they do collective training as well. A lot of it is instrumentation as well as devices that collects data and enables them to analyze the data and then determine where the units are good or bad. So it measures performance, or it helps measure performance. So there's 4 product offices, which is basically the 05 level, lieutenant colonel level, if you will, offices. One of them is virtual training systems, which does a bunch of driver training systems for individual vehicles and platforms. They also do what they call the family of maintenance trainers, where they have vehicles or engines set up so maintainers can actually practice maintaining them. Another one is the combat training instrumentation system, CTIS. Basically, they're the ones that are providing the network and the instrumentation for the combat training centers. And so that network actually enables them to gather data so that they use it within the after-action reviews in order, again, to measure performance of the forces. The next one is synthetic training environment live training systems. This is a separate but related to the CFT. I don't know, separate but related. It's separate from the CFT, but very much related is what I probably should say. And so that is basically a system with the instrumentation of the weapons as they're out on the range, whether it's the CTC or home station. And so that way, if you have a lot of people in the Army knows what MILES is. MILES stands for Multiple Integrated Laser Engagement Systems, but it's the sensors they normally wear on the body, and so that way if somebody shoots you with a laser, it basically will go off and you're dead. So they have that same system for vehicles and other weapon systems. And so that CLTS does a lot of that right now, with the idea that their future mission would be to tie that into all of the STI products and networks and things like that. And last but not least is the tactical training system. They focus on fires, mostly gunnery type ranges. They assist with the qualification. They have instruments on these ranges that can detect not only how the operators did within the tank or the platform, but also where the round landed and things like that. And it helps prepare these crews for gunnery qualifications. They also do things like tactical moving targets, where they have these tank-looking things that basically drive across the range so that it provides a more realistic target for operators. I think my job as PM Trade is essentially to clear the path for the product offices. These guys are very talented and had a lot more experience and technical knowledge than me, so they definitely don't need me doing their job. But I look at my job as helping to gain their resources, get rid of any roadblocks that might be inhibiting them, and help fight for funding and provide that close air support when needed. So I'm basically just clearing the path for these guys, the O5s, in order to be able to do their job.
Thanks for breaking all that down. Your role clearly touches a lot of key efforts. With that being said, PM Trade has been a key part of Army readiness. From your perspective, how has the program evolved to meet the changing demands of the modern battlefield?
So some things that I'm seeing is that commanders want more access to data. They want to be able to know to the nth degree how their units are performing in force-on-force situations, crew training, that kind of thing. They want their soldiers to have access to high-fidelity training from collective training systems all the way down to your iPhone. And I think it in terms, and probably because I've only been here a month, of pilot training. So when you do pilot training, the highest fidelity that you can get is you're in the aircraft flying and you're with an instructor. The next level below that is you're in a moving training system, hydraulic moving training system that feels a lot like a plane would if you were in the air.
Right.
Then the next level below that is you're basically on a simulator that doesn't move, that has all the instrumentation of a plane. And so it looks like, if you're looking out the front window, like you're on a plane. And then the lowest fidelity would be like maybe like Microsoft Flight Sim or something along those lines, that you could actually do off of your phone if you wanted to. So I think in terms of fidelity of training along those lines, and this is what commanders want, they want that fidelity from the most realistic looking piece of training all the way down to the lowest fidelity, so these soldiers have these opportunities to practice processes and procedures and things like that. At the same time, the commanders want a lot of data based off this so that they can see where their units and their individual soldiers are weak, and then they can adapt the training for that purpose. So a lot of what PM Trade does with their instrumentation and sensors is help collect that data. I think too, because that data is so necessary, there needs to be the network infrastructure that supports that. And so we're going to be utilizing cloud environments, eventually artificial intelligence in that ecosystem to provide all that data. And so that's one of those things where I think we're going to is making sure that all the programs are cloud ready so that we can adapt to that next evolution in the future of PM Trade.
How will trade continue to stay relevant in the face of training emerging requirements and the changing technology?
So the thing is you have to be able to see what's out there and where the force is going. So there is this cloud environment and AI, and so you kind of have to anticipate in making your systems ready for that. And so you try to get ahead of their mindset of what they want to see or do as far as like training capabilities. And it's very tough in a financially constrained environment to be able to do much in the way of R&D when really all they want is your current capability in the field. That is basically the measure of our success, is getting that capability to the field. And so the best thing to do is to try to do it in a way that where you can iterate fairly quickly. Really, it's gone are the days where acquisition gets a requirement and then has 10 years to deliver something. Technology moves way faster than that.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you can do like what they call a minimum viable product, which means something in the acquisition world, but I mean it more generically, that you find out what is the least we can put out in the field, and then you basically iterate on that. And that's what iPhone does all the time. They don't put out a perfect product. They put out one knowing it has flaws and then immediately put out the fixes for it. So we need to put out product that may not meet all the requirements, but then we have a path and a plan to actually iterate on those products in order to get there. And it's a lot easier when you have common software or the software is hardware agnostic and things like that. We have some things that are platform specific, but not many. And so that iteration helps you keep up with technology. It helps you keep up with changing techniques that the military is using. And then the threat always has a vote on that.
Looking ahead, things are always evolving. What innovations in training or simulation do you believe are most critical to invest in right now?
I think it really is the cloud infrastructure that we need to invest in right now, and providing those networks and storage solutions that would allow that. There's a lot of idea of combining testing and training capabilities, and not capabilities so much as like sharing the data, which cloud environments help enable to do that. And so again, it goes back to that thirst to data, and then making sure that we're going to be able to connect with next generation constructive, which is essentially the overall network for warfighter simulations. And so ultimately, those have always been separate, which are just network-based training capabilities, and it trains the staff. And so next gen constructive is the next evolution of that, where then we have our combat training center networks, and that provide a bunch of data. They actually want to connect the two. So the idea is in the future that you can do have one unit doing as a drill to train their staff in a warfighter simulation. At the same time, you might actually have people in the combat training center actually doing live maneuvers and operations, and their data is in play with the warfighter simulation data. So you get a much more realistic overall simulation with various levels of live, constructive, and virtual.
Yeah, for sure.
And so knowing the big design for that, we have to be ready for it.
Yeah. Team Orlando is known for bringing together government, industry, and academia to drive innovation in MS&T. PM Trade is also included in that collaboration. What's your perspective on the importance of these partnerships in developing effective training solutions?
Well, we can't innovate in a vacuum, definitely. So we need the bigger group in order to get all those good ideas that we can put together and produce something. And training isn't just an Army problem. Our systems may be unique, but the overall training problem is actually out there. So it's a good idea to see what's available commercially that we might be able to adapt. And I think the biggest example of this most recently is what we're calling the data pillar, which is a combined effort between a couple of programs within PM Trade to include the contractors that work for them in order to put the Combat Training Center information system in the cloud so that the observer controllers are able to pull in a lot of data and information so that when they do those AARs, they have a very high fidelity AAR and are able to provide a lot of information. And this includes a bit of AI as well too, because once they have all this data in the data lake, as they're calling it, then you can use an AI to actually query that data for those typical things or those untypical things that you might want to know, like those one-offs that one commander might want to know that aren't the typical things that you would look at. So we have a current collaboration with the Navy here in Orlando. We have a lab that we share in order to develop simulation and training technology. Talking to Captain Betts, we would like to actually determine a project that we can jointly do with Team Orlando that actually shows some good benefits to DoD as far as the training realm. The program within PM Trade is Virtual Training System, shares a lab with the Navy, and that lab might be a key part of that.
That would be great. With everything changing so fast, how do you balance readiness for today's mission with also preparing for the fight of tomorrow?
Yeah, this is a key question in a financially constrained environment, which we are very much in right now. The number one priority is providing capability today. And I discussed that a little bit earlier, like even if it doesn't meet all the requirements, we need to get it out in the field and then continue to iterate on that. And I think we need to work a lot closer with the operational forces and rely less on the documented requirements. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be requirements before everybody sends me emails. I'm just saying that they should be broader in nature and that a lot of the what I call the small R versus the big R requirements, we get out of our work with the operational forces on that. And we need to update capability often. And so that's one of those things that our process makes hard to do. But we're getting more and more into that rapid development, rapid fielding kind of thing, and we just need to do that more often. At the same time, if you had the luxury of people and finances, assign a team to look at R&D, have a future cell that basically goes out there and looks for those new technologies that we might be able to pull in a later date.
When it comes to metrics or outcomes, which are most important to you when evaluating success in your programs?
In my opinion, my success should be solely driven on my ability to deliver capability. So the metric is the outcome, in my opinion. I know there's always the standby of cost, schedule, and performance, but you can actually have great cost, schedule, and performance and never deliver anything. And so it's a little different from how I'm evaluated officially to how I feel like I'm doing personally, and that is all based on delivering capability. The other thing, too, is making sure that it's a relevant capability and that the units are actually using it. There's been too many times where we've delivered something too late, technology's moved on, or the units just don't find whatever we're delivering useful, and so it just goes into storage and they never see it again.
As we come to an end, we like to end on this question and give our listeners some final thoughts. What advice would you offer someone who is considering going into a similar career path as you? In particular, what would you tell someone that you wish someone had told you when you were deciding your future career?
I once had somebody tell me a story about golf, and I've dabbled in it a couple times and just never picked it up.
Yeah.
But they always talked about how you go out and golf and you're just frustrated and you're frustrated and you're like, I'm going to give that up. And then there's just one shot that you do really, really well, and they call that the comeback shot. And you're like, all right, so maybe I can do this again. And I think of acquisition is the same way. It can be a frustratingly bureaucratic process. But there's always that one thing that just really motivates you to want to continue doing it. And it's usually something to do with being able to deliver something rapidly and being able to see the soldiers use it. And so that's what I would say is that you have to understand the bureaucracy in which you're working in, play the hand that you're dealt, and figure out how to win and get that capability out there. And then luck comes from those who actually do hard work. So you got to just figure out how to make that happen. So you're going to get your comeback shot and stay with acquisition, but it's not always going to be like that.
I like that. That's very good.
Thank you.
Before we sign off, where should our listeners go to find out more about PM Trade?
On the website peostri.army.mil, and PEOSTRI also has a Facebook page, Instagram, and X. We try to post often on what we're doing, and so you can find us on any of those sites.
And with that, that's a wrap on this episode. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you very much. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Want to stay in the loop on what's happening in the modeling and simulation and Team Orlando communities? Head to teamorlando.org and follow us on LinkedIn, X, and Facebook for all the latest updates and upcoming events. If you're looking to spotlight your organization or share your voice on AIM on MS&T, sponsorship and guest opportunities are available. Contact us. The information will be in the description. Don't forget to follow AIM on MS&T on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. I will talk to you all in the next one. Bye!